Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. I have the distinct pleasure and honor to welcome one of the great leaders of the world Jewish community, Malcolm Hoenlin. For those of you who know Mr. Hoenlin, he was the executive vice president of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations for many, many years. He still is in a leadership role there, even though officially he's a little bit step back, step to the side, but there's no such thing when you're dealing with Mr. Hoenlin as stepping aside or stepping back. He is the founding executive director of the Greater New York Conference on Soviet Jewry, one of the heroes of the entire Soviet Jewry movement, and also the Jewish Community Council Relations Council of New York. He has a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, and more importantly, he is one of those people in our community that we all look up to, not only for his wisdom, but also for the constant Kiddush Hashem he creates every time he meets with world leaders, with American leaders, with Jewish leaders, and with regular Amcha, like those of us. And so it is my pleasure to have you with us today. And thank you so very much for joining us.
It was worth it for that introduction alone. But it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for your leadership and the important role you've played within the conference and in the community as a whole, and certainly in your local community.
Well, thank you so very much. I just really want to start with what's happening in the world today, with what's going on in Israel. I know you have been in the thick of things, even though probably somewhat in the background, like you normally operate. What's happening right now? And Netanyahu put a pause. Not everyone believes that's happening. American Jewry looked like they were ready to rebel. What should we be expecting over the coming weeks in Israel?
Well, I think the next few weeks will be quieter because of the confluence of Pesach, Ramadan, Easter, other things, which will give people a chance to reflect a little bit. And the fact that they did put a pause, and it's likely not to arise until the summer session. The Knesset is suspended for the next 6 weeks until after Yom Ha'atzmaut, and this is a special one, the 75th anniversary, which unfortunately also became a victim of the controversy. And if I could take apart the different elements of your question, for one, for American Jewry, I think very few people understand what the issues are here. And in that, I fault the Israelis and particularly the Prime Minister for not doing a better job as the master communicator from the beginning, laying out the issues, because this is a move that all sides, left and right, had long proposed and long wanted to see, that the activist court has gone to extremes, and the whole process of appointments, et cetera, very consistent with what we do in the United States, the changes that are being made. That case has not been made, and people therefore are confused. And I think a lot of tensions from the past, left, right, religious, secular, poor, rich, I mean, all of these differences now play into it, and people are just venting. Those who didn't like the outcome of the election, and especially from the left, and you saw the right did not participate until just recently, and a couple 100,000 people showed up at a spontaneous demonstration the other night. I think that there are remarkable aspects. One, that you had no looting with hundreds of thousands of people over the weeks, 12 weeks demonstrating. You didn't have any riots. You didn't have kind of criminal activity that you would have seen in virtually any city in the United States under similar circumstances, and that people were waving the flag. It wasn't flag burning. It wasn't rejection of the state. It was a reaffirmation in many respects, and many young people, perhaps, who had been distancing themselves, really re-engaged. There were threats about pulling out money and other things, most of which I think were not substantiated. But people were using the leverage to try and communicate a message, and they felt perhaps that it wasn't being responded to, and they kept moving more and more extreme in the position. So the issues have been lost in the swirl of events. And I spent most of the last 3 months going back and forth 4 or 5 times, meeting with officials, even last week. And I think I found on everyone's part a desire to find a ladder to climb down. There are those who didn't want negotiations because, let's say, the opposition saw that they were weakening Netanyahu's advantage constantly. So for them, there was a reason to keep the controversy alive and not to come to a resolution. I think that has changed. You saw the talks that are going on with the president. And I hope that people will take the time to read pieces like Alex Traiman's and JNS, which tries to analyze, and there are several others, that tries to analyze what is happening, what's at stake. There's a lot of confusion still, a lot of statements based on ignorance. And especially we've seen statements coming from the president and from other officials here, which others reject as interference in a purely domestic issue. And we don't see a similar intervention regarding the demonstrations in France, which have many more millions of people involved. But, it's a reflection of the closeness, I think, that people feel towards Israel, and that they feel that they can comment and get involved on every issue. I believe the relationship will remain strong. There's every reason for it to get much stronger given events in the region. That's a long answer, but it's a very complicated.
There was a fascinating piece from Daniel Gordis today, which basically celebrated where we're at, recognizing some of the very same points you made, and even more, that this just shows the strength of the democracy in Israel, that all of these
and the commitment. Yes, I think this could turn out to be a good thing, that people became lethargic. The 5 elections in 2 years or whatever, people became cynical, and I think the frustration of all of that is being reflected, and now it's been released. And they did things that were provocative, like the move to march into Bnei Brak. And the response on the people of Bnei Brak and the rabbis who gave the orders was really the correct thing. They said, go and greet them. And the people stood outside with water and cake and cholent. It was Thursday night, I think, the demonstration. And they set up tables with cholent. And you can see the people, some of them came with bicycle helmets and other things, clearly being prepared for a confrontation. And they were crying and they were hugging, ultimately. And I think that if we can take advantage of a crisis, and I forgot who it was in the Obama years who said, we never waste a crisis. Well, here's a crisis I think can yield some positive outcomes, but we have to make sure that the disinformation stops, the misinformation stops, that we hold people to account. I think there are people who have done and said irresponsible things, and especially at this time of heightened tensions, it's a time when wise people have to be careful with your words, because there are a lot of people out there ready to exploit everything and anything, and to raise the tensions. I mean, people outside, let alone also people inside.
Well, what's the role of American Jewry in this? There's always this tension that we're not citizens, and on the other hand, we are supporters of Israel through thick and thin, and then there are voices in the United States. I know your operation, what you've always done is based on relationship and personal relationship, and always quietly. But there have been statements. Where is the line of supporting versus getting involved?
So, yes, you're right. My style has always been through the years, I believe it's important to build credibility, and you don't do that in headlines. You do that in the relationships you establish, the credibility you establish, the trust you establish, and too often going public can jeopardize it. But there are times when it is necessary. And I think a lot of people were looking to Jewish leadership to say something. But you have to think not only of the moment, you have to think about how your words will be used in the future, and the care you must exercise. Because, when the BDS people can just pick up the statements of the leaders and say, oh, you see, democracy is under siege, democracy is in danger in Israel. And then can cite Israeli officials or American Jewish officials, leaders saying things. It's a time when you have to be very careful with what you say and how you say it. And again, it's a domestic issue. It's not an international issue. It gained international aspects and certainly significance when the president and others got involved in the issue. So, and there's an obligation on the part of leadership to explain it to people. We've done many Zoom calls and other things to try and give people the different perspectives to understand what is happening. I'm still not sure that most people do, but that's a responsibility we have. And I think to be supportive of Israel at a time like this, to let them know that American Jews don't just come and tell them what they should do and how they should live. It's not a parallel society. They don't have a constitution. They don't have many things, institutions that Americans have. So we can't just apply every American solution to every problem in Israel. But I do think that it's a time of showing solidarity. It's a time to hear them, give them a platform that they know that their concerns are being heard. But at the same time, to understand that we have huge challenges. You know, when Iran and Saudi Arabia sign deals, when we see China coming into the Middle East, Russia, and the changes that are taking place, you know, let alone the threats against Israel, we have to keep that paramount in our minds and realize how important it is, number one, to achieve unity within Israel and between Israel and diaspora communities, because the enemies of Israel are the enemies of the Jews. When they say them, they mean all of us. And for too long, you know, we think we can separate aspects. I think in the last 2 years, with the rise of anti-Semitism, et cetera, we realize that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism because it denies Jews the rights that other people have. It's not whether you can criticize a policy of Israel. It's about Israel's right to exist and denying Jews the same fulfillment that every other people is entitled to. We see it at the UN, we see it in campuses, we see it everywhere. So we should not contribute to that. We should not give further ammunition. We have to maintain the guard. And I must say, I think the community has mobilized in remarkable ways for it. I'm not sure about how successful, but certainly the effort is there. Creative efforts are underway and have been underway. And therefore, I think American Jews, if they want to speak out of love, we have quiet channels to reach the Prime Minister. I saw him in the last few weeks, other leaders. You know, the New York Times and Fox News are not the ways we should be communicating to the government of Israel. We have to do it directly and use the channels we have in responsible ways.
Now, can you explain a little bit about the agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia? We were under the impression, I was under the impression, that there was even a slight chance of Saudi Arabia coming under the Abraham Accords and was getting closer to Israel. And then all of a sudden, this connection with Iran and the reopening of diplomatic relations. What's going on there?
So this is not something new. This has been underway for a long time, but the negotiations were being conducted in Oman and in Iraq, where most of it was worked out. It was not worked out in China in 3 days. This has been hammered out. You know, China is the number one purchaser of oil from both Saudi Arabia and Iran. So they have a vested interest with them. China has long wanted to establish itself in the Middle East using its Belt and Road Initiative, using its trade, and this gave them an opportunity to increase their presence and in a credible way, having brought together Saudi Arabia and Iran, not to start relations. They had it for many years. It was suspended. And supposedly in 2 months, the foreign ministers are going to be talking and seeing what they can hammer out. The fundamental differences still remain. Iran's targeting of Saudi Arabia, wanting to take over Mecca, Medina, you know, the kingdom of the two holiest sites. Their goal was, one, to get Iran television, which is based in Saudi Arabia, national television, to stop the attacks on them, because it was really having an impact on the people in Iran who have, you know, demonstrated in the hundreds of thousands, led by the women initially, but spreading to every sector of society. It's a little quieter now, but they are continuing. And the government enjoys very little support nationwide. The economy of Iran is in free fall. Its currency lost 25%, I think, in the last month, after going up to over 600,000 rials to the dollar, which is, you know, 100-fold of what it was not long ago. And they've been saved a little bit because they selling ammunition and drones and things to Russia, and Russian oil exports bypassing the sanctions by going through Iran, and of course their oil sales to China. So the supreme leader and the leadership of Iran, they've been doing well. The people are suffering terribly, and there's a drought in half the country. Unemployment amongst young people is at about 50%. I could go through all the statistics, just say no, that the economy is in ruins. The ability to export the quote revolution continues, but they haven't got an air force. Now Russia is supposedly going to sell them Sukhoi jet fighters. Most of their aircraft are not good, and therefore they developed the drones, and they have the biggest drone fleet in the Middle East, and are selling some to Russia and building a factory in Russia for use in the Ukraine war. But overall, Iran continues its aggressive actions, supporting the Houthis, supporting the Hamas, Hezbollah, et cetera, in Africa, in Latin America, in South America, which will be a subject for another thing, a discussion. But it's a very serious matter. They are expanding their influence. We see the changes in government, none of them good. And this is not 8,000 miles away. It's an hour and a half from Florida. So Iran hasn't changed its stripes. Iran remains an aggressive Shiite extremist, ideologically driven power, looking to extend its influence to challenge Saudi Arabia, and certainly Bahrain as a means to get to Saudi Arabia. But they want to see the broadcast stop. They want to try and project a different image. For the Saudis, number one, they want to get the Houthis to stop attacking. They've hit their oil refineries. They've hit other facilities in Saudi Arabia. All those weapons are coming from Iran and continue to flow from Iran. America just picked up another shipment of weapons going to the Houthis through, smuggling groups, but originating in Iran. And they're going to take those weapons supposedly and send them to the forces in Ukraine to use. That would be a sort of justice to the Iranians. So they want to see Saudi Arabia wants the Houthis thing. Second, I do believe it's a message to America that they feel that America is pulling out, and they're going to have a second bet, and that is with China. It's not because they trust China or they don't know what China does. China exploits every country it goes into. They build up debts, and then they collect on those debts, take over ports, take over infrastructure. They go into with a scorched earth policy in Africa, where they buy huge swaths of land, take all the food they grow out, and leave nothing behind. It's something you hear from every African leader where China has been active. But they have a lot of money, they have a lot of leverage, and Russia needs them right now, even though the animosities between the two continue. But it serves each of their purposes now, and they create an alternative front that the Saudis are joining. The Shanghai Cooperation Council is, to me, as significant as the signing of the deal with Iran. It is a message to the West. It's saying we have alternatives, and it's very dangerous for the situation in the Middle East. They still know that there's only one permanent aircraft carrier in the region, as the leaders of Saudi Arabia have told me, and that's Israel. They know that Israel's the source of stability, not instability. They need Israeli technology. And I think that didn't change. And there's still prospects and possibilities. And some even say greater prospects that because of the deal with Iran, maybe Saudi Arabia will have greater flexibility to be able to reach out to Israel. I wouldn't count on it at this point. But I do think that one lesson for sure, if you want relations with Saudi Arabia, don't talk about it in the press. Don't make public statements, because that's the one thing they can't deal with. I think as long as the king is alive, it'll be more difficult. I think that the prospects still remain, and we have to strengthen it. We have to reach out to other countries. I'm working on a whole new phase of it to bring in many other countries into the process. UAE, as you know, established diplomatic relations renewed with Assad, and Assad is going to do it with of Syria with Saudi Arabia as well. There is a lot of shifting plates here, a lot, and a lot of people who are going to take advantage or seek to take advantage of it, especially Iran. Turkey right now is not in a position to do much exploitation because of their internal problems. They have an election coming up. They've been much better towards Israel because it serves their purpose right now. But you have a lot of moving pieces in Syria alone. You have Russia, Iran, Turkey, everybody competing. You have the militia groups. You have the expansion of Hezbollah's activities near the Israeli border. You have so much happening. Iran taking advantage of the humanitarian aid to send in weapons within those shipments, and Israel having to take out one truck out of 24 or 12 that are coming in. Iran has supplied them with an air defense system which has been activated. As you know, that Israel's ability to maneuver is really critical to stop the shipment of more and more sophisticated weapons to Hezbollah and to the Iranian-backed groups in Syria.
In your 40 years of international leadership, are we in a worse place today than we ever have been? Are we in a better place? Are we just in a place?
Wow, that is a very good question. It's a doctoral thesis, not an answer. But yeah, we're certainly in a place.
Yeah.
I think a lot has yet to be determined, when we see the outcome of what's being done in Israel. But I do think that Israel is strong. And I think Israel, in many respects, is in the strongest position because there's no real existential threat other than Iran to Israel. I remember many years ago when, I was the first person briefed on the Oslo Accords by Prime Minister Rabin and Foreign Minister Peres. Lester Pollock, the chairman, and I were asked to come over, and we were briefed, and I asked Rabin questions for an hour and a half. And bottom line, he said to me, every question you asked me was right. Now I have a question for you. What's the alternative? He said, we have faced existential dangers, then Iraq and Iran. He said, the Palestinians and Syrians they're dangers to us, but not existential dangers. So if we can get them off the table, then we can focus on the true threats. Iran remains the true threat, and they are building up their nuclear capacity every day. They have the enriched uranium now. They haven't weaponized it, meaning the ability to affix it to a weapon onto a missile. They have the missile capacity. They've been testing it all along, and they've been working on the weaponization. They have introduced faster and faster the IRG-6 centrifuges. And these are not technical things. These are real clear messages about how advanced their nuclear program is, and that the JCPOA did not stop it. And there are those who are trying to advocate getting back into it. What we need to do now is more sanctions, more crippling sanctions on it. They do work. They do have an impact. We have to see to it that Iran never gets the capacity to really put together that nuclear weapon, because they will use it. Eventually, they will use it. And they have to understand what the cost is, and will be Israel and the United States have done that, have tried to, by actions and eliminations and other things, sending messages about the red lines that are being crossed. But for Israel today, its economy, it's strong. The threats of isolation, African countries today, this week, 20 African countries represented at a conference. The joint exercises, both in the Mediterranean side with Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Morocco, Egypt, many other countries on the Gulf side, with the UAE, with Bahrain, even with other countries quietly participating. The biggest exercise in history, Juniper Oak, that took place in Israel with 6,000 American troops, 112 aircraft, 12 naval units, including aircraft carrier. Not one word in the press about it. The biggest historic exercise, and a message to the whole region that the United States and Israel are together, they're cooperating. This week we have Israeli jets flying in Nevada in the Red Flag exercise. Again, nobody will write about it. So there are many good things happening. Israel's high-tech industry continues to grow. There's still continuing investment in very large numbers coming into Israel even during this period. Obviously, the worldwide economic difficulties impact Israel as well. But to your question, Israel today is in a good position. It's strong. It's now water independent, energy independent, things that were unthinkable, and not isolated in the region, that more and more countries want to have relations, public, private, and business and other exchanges with Israel. But the challenges are also great. So and we see Lebanon in complete disintegration. We see Jordan, hostility from Jordan increasing. We see the challenges to Sisi, whose stability is critical to Israel. And we see what we've seen in the Gulf that we mentioned before are just some of the symptoms. And the war in Ukraine has also been a destabilizing factor with impact in the Middle East as well.
So why weren't all those good things, the military exercises, why weren't they in the press? Was that a conscious decision, or just people like writing about bad things?
Right on both counts. It was not a conscious decision. It was the information was put out. I spoke about it on my radio shows. People calling up about it afterwards, wanting details. The American planes flew down the Mediterranean coast of Israel as a demonstration to the people of Israel that, we have your back, we're here with you. So it's not because the information wasn't put out. It's because good news from Israel doesn't sell. Bad news sells. Man bites dog is a story. Dog bites man, not a story when it comes to Israel. And if this had taken place virtually anywhere else, I can't believe that there wouldn't have been a slew of reports. And the way, if you listen to how American pilots and others who were involved in these exercises praised the cooperation, what they learned from Israel, and what Israelis learned from them, and having these planes, the F-15s, F-35s, who came to Nevada to do joint exercises, joint bombing runs, air refueling, even though the American refuelers didn't refuel Israeli jets. A capacity we hope that the United States will finally provide Israel, because it's critical for all of the regional challenges that Israel faces. So the answer lies that 90% or 80% of the reports that we read about the Middle East all come from the AP or from single sources. And they don't hire reporters anymore. Very few places have real reporters in Israel. They have stringers, many of them Palestinians, who do not give a balanced account. And many of the reporters come with biased views because their networks, their stations are biased as well. There are very few that will give Israel a fair shake, that show the positive stories. How many covered the hospital that Israel set up and that just came back, as opposed to some of the workers who came back? But the hospital was there. They saved 470 lives. They did many operations in Turkey, just as they did in Ukraine when they set up a field hospital and elsewhere. The positive things that Israel does, punching far above its weight in responding to international crises, whether it's Haiti or Kenya or anywhere else. Good news about Israel is not popular.
No, I even saw in the national news when they were showing the demonstrations, they seemed to find the one fellow without a shirt on and were able to take pictures through the flames, which made it look like not just bonfires, but made it look like they were burning things. And when you see it from the other perspective, you realize that sense of nationalism, the positive sense of national pride that came through in all of those demonstrations. Believe it or not, our time is up. And this has been fast.
We didn't begin.
I know, we barely got started. We didn't touch on Ukraine. We didn't touch about your story, which is fascinating in and of itself. But I really do appreciate your time, especially Erev Pesach, and with all of your shuttle diplomacy. And on behalf of everyone who's going to see this, and on behalf of those who are on now, I just want to thank you and wish you continued strength and success, because you are one of those people we all look towards for leadership, for guidance, and a little bit of salvation as an agent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in so many things you do. So thank you.
It's all in his hands, and it's all in his hands. And I want to wish everybody Chag Kosher V'Sameach, and to thank everybody who watches this after Pesach, Shana Tova, whenever you get to it. But I hope we'll have more opportunities to talk. It's a pleasure, really, to talk with you and about these vital issues. The most important thing is educate our youth, get them to listen, get them to understand the issues. I've been doing, I didn't do much publicity over the years, but I did lately because I want to energize this generation, the young people. It's really critical. They don't feel they can be efficacious. They don't know the issues. Our schools are not teaching them enough about the issues. So parents, others, demand it in the community. Get them to be involved. Let them know they can make a difference.
And on that note, Chag Kasher V'Sameach, and thank you so very, very much, Malcolm. Bye-bye.
My pleasure.